Thank you so much, Fiona, and thank you, Brett. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here. As Fiona said, I'm a futurist, and I spend a lot of my time going into research labs and talking to innovators all over the world about the things that they're working on and putting it together into a comprehensive picture of what the world is going to be like over the next 10 years and beyond. To start off with, I'd like you to think about 3 megatrends that are going to hit us over the next 10 years. The first is that new devices, new gadgets, mean new opportunities. And I'll be showing you some things that will impact your businesses in the years to come. Second, everything, and I mean everything, is going to be connected. There's an underlying addressing technology called IPv6, this boring little addressing technology that will let us connect 340 trillion devices to the internet. Everything is going to come alive. The third major trend is that anything that can be automated will be. Tim talked a little bit about it in his speech. I'm going to go into it in a bit more detail. So let's start with some gadgets. Many of you would be already familiar with elderly tracking devices. Things like the Kanita Watch has been around for a long time, actually in about 2007, a watch that lets you track by GPS where your loved one might be. If they're elderly, maybe they have Alzheimer's, you can figure out where they are and help them if they get into trouble. Newer devices like the Buddy system take it a step beyond. They're waterproof, and they have sensors built into it that can detect falls. And they can alert next of kin or a carer if somebody that they're looking after gets into trouble, like falls down and can't get up. But they go much beyond this. There's a new device that came on the market this year called Body Guardian, and it's a 3-part device. It's actually designed for elderly patients, or anyone really, with cardiac problems that are non-lethal arrhythmias. So there's a sensor that gets worn like a bandage over your heart. It sends signals to an app on a smartphone, and from there to your carers. So literally, you can have people that have cardiac issues and have a health team monitor them outside of an inpatient facility. It allows a great deal more flexibility than other solutions that are on the market. Another innovation that will be launched next year is the Kanita Watch. And you might say, well, smartwatches have been around for a while. This one is specifically designed for elderly patients. It's voice activated, you just talk to it. It has motion sensors so that it's able to detect if a patient has fallen or they're immobilized for a period. When you talk to the watch, you can ask it for help. It goes to an operator system. If you don't answer, it will automatically, depending on your preferences, notify your next of kin or perhaps an emergency service. It's able to detect situations like falls or other periods of immobility, and of course it's a GPS tracker as well. This is a device that I really love. It's called the Kanita Scout. It was designed by a Belgian innovator named Walter de Bruer, who took Star Trek as a business plan rather than just a science fiction show. How many of you have ever seen Star Trek? A few of you. You probably have seen tricorders. Well, this device is meant to be an early tricorder. You hold it up to someone's temple for 30 seconds. The only requirement is that they stay still for those 30 seconds. It will monitor their heart rate, their breathing rate, their core body temperature, and a range of other physiological symptoms, all in one device. Now imagine that you've got a healthcare facility and you have a patient that you would normally need to wake up every couple of hours to be able to take blood pressure, take their temperature. With a device like this, you literally just put it to their temple and you don't have to wake them up at all. And it sends the information to a smart app, so you can use it by yourself or you could use it in a care facility. If your vitals are within the normal range, it'll show you green signals. If you're in a moderate range, it might show you orange signals. Just like a traffic light system, it'll show you red if there's a problem, and it will track things over the course of time. We're starting to enter the world where there's a nexus of science fiction and real science. Now, these sensors that are in these devices are also entering our clothes, smart clothing. Right now, one of the biggest markets for smart clothing is in the fitness space. An example is with this Athos smart clothing. And here there are 18 sensors in the top and another 14 in the garments. Most of those sensors are designed to track muscle activity because athletes use this kind of feedback to help them in their training. But there are also sensors that monitor your heart rate, your breathing rate, and other vital signs. You can imagine that there are many applications that also fit into the healthcare space. Now, what if this clothing also had the ability to have tactile touch and feel, haptics? What if you were, let's say, a grandmother and you're video conferencing with your grandson and he says, "Oh, Grammy, I love you, I want to give you a big hug," and your clothing responds as if you're getting a hug. That's not science fiction, it's actually becoming fact. Earlier this year, a company called Quamicorp launched the Bond wearables. They're a set of 2 bracelets. You touch one of them, and the person who's wearing the reciprocal bracelet feels that touch. It's a way of basically tapping and saying, "Hey, I'm thinking about you." The same kind of technology is eventually going to integrate with smart clothing. It gets better still. Smart materials in the clothing will help us protect our bones. There's one in particular, Armor Gel, that is designed for elderly patients. I'd like to show you a short video of how that works.
Happen when
you can imagine how useful that will be to an elderly population where one of the most traumatic things that can happen is you trip and fall and break a bone, and the next thing you know, you're getting hip replacements or all sorts of other joint replacements. Incredible technology. The sensors that we're developing are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. They're going to go from our clothing into our bodies. There's already an ingestible sensor by a company called Proteus, the Proteus pill, that has been approved by the FDA in America for embedding in medication. One of the earliest applications is in helping people remember, and their carers remember, how much medication a person has taken. Another application that is a joint venture between Proteus and Motorola is to be able to use these sensors as biometric password unlockers, basically turning you into a bit of a cyborg. Just wave your hand over your computer and it will automatically unlock. But imagine that you have these tiny sensors and you've got high definition cameras as well. You take these pills and suddenly you can see what's happening in your digestive tract. Forget about going to the hospital for a colonoscopy. You just take a pill and get very high image diagnostics. Our future is going to be a whole lot more pleasant for people who have health elements to track. Another really interesting technology is augmented reality. And when I talk about AR, what I'm talking about is a contextual overlay on everything that you see in the world in a transparent layer. A simple example is navigation. Instead of looking down at your car nav system, you're literally just looking out wherever you would want to, and you see the navigation signals. Or if you're at an archaeological site, you might have an example like this where you see an ancient ruin, but superimposed on it is what the building looked like hundreds or thousands of years ago. One of the first areas where this technology is being deployed is in the industrial market. CSIRO has come out with an innovation that's a combination system that uses smart glasses with cameras, where you might have a technician that's a highly skilled mechanic, but they're working, let's say, on a new aircraft part that they haven't been trained on. So they're looking at an aircraft part, and they've got an expert somewhere, maybe across the world, who can see exactly what they're seeing and can instruct them, plug it in here, and the person in the field sees a little orange hand that shows them exactly where to plug it in. There are medical applications for this as well. Another picture that I have here shows an example of someone doing a triage in the field, and maybe it's not someone who's trained in medicine at all, and you can say, no, that bandage is too loose, wrap it a little bit tighter, because you're seeing everything in real time and being able to converse in an intelligent way. Now, you don't even need smart glasses for augmented reality. A really interesting app that you can play with is from CommBank. It's actually a property guide, and what this app does is it uses the combination of the camera in your smartphone along with GPS signals. You point it at a house and it'll give you all kinds of property data. Have a play, it's really fascinating. In the medical world, there's a new device that was just launched by Vena Medical. And what this device is designed for, it's an augmented reality overlay that uses infrared and multispectral light to help you see the vascular system of patients. So as you're doing IVs or giving any other kinds of injections, you can look at the patient with an unobstructed view, but also see their vascular system. It's going to take a lot of pain out of applying medicines. It gets better still. One of the chips that came on the market last year is the RealSense chip from Intel. This is a very high definition 3D camera. It's able to take pictures and videos in such precise definition that it can scan something and send a CAD file to a 3D printer and print it out. It does facial recognition. Not only can it identify who you are, but it can read the expressions on your face and determine your emotions. It can figure out when you're happy, sad, frustrated. Put this together with augmented reality, and you can imagine that you've got smart glasses, you're walking around in a room, you see somebody that you met a number of years ago, you recognize their face, but you can't for the life of you remember their name. No worries. It's going to recognize their face, maybe go into your contact book, maybe go to LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever the social media of the day is and tell you all about them, and maybe even where you met. It gets better still. What happens when this migrates from smart glasses to smart contacts? Smart contacts with embedded cameras. Last year, Google took out a patent for a smart contact that has an embedded camera. If you want to take a picture in this patent, you just blink real quick and it will take a picture or maybe start a video. By the time something like this comes to market in about 7 years, these opaque bits are going to be completely transparent. They'll probably be made of graphene. And you might think, well, why would someone stick this in their eyes? The answer is that it's a combination of biotech and ICT. It's going to allow you to do things like use glucose to figure out when an insulin patient is having problems. It's going to have auto-focusing capabilities. There are other precancerous biomarkers that you'll be able to detect with this as well. Vision is a natural interface, and there are already devices, for example, from Sony PlayStation that use vision as the means to focus. We do it with our eyes all the time. Home automation is another area that's going to change the lives of our older citizens. Having your house come alive and turn on lights when you enter a room, lock the door, do all the things that you need to do to live a happy life. What happens when you combine it with wellness? Well, there's a company in America called Alarm.com that has done just this. They've merged together security applications, home automation, and wellness detections. For instance, if you have an elderly patient and they're in their bed for too long or someplace immobile for too long, it can alert your next of kin or a carer as to what's going on. There are also robots that are coming into our house. An example is Roomba. How many of you have little robot vacuum cleaners? Anybody? I have one. His name's Robbie. He's kind of dumb now. He gets in trouble all the time. The latest version of iRobot is going to have internet connections and cameras. He's going to be able to intelligently map out a room. What if a device like this was also able to detect the fact that you might have tripped and fallen and broken a bone and send for help? We also have smart toilets that are already on the market. If you think about it, a lot of information comes from pathology samples, but it's a chore, collecting things, taking it to the path lab, and so on. What if you had systems that could automatically detect all kinds of diseases through just your everyday use? Smart appliances are another thing that's going to change our lives. Last year, LG came out with this particular smart fridge that has cameras that are able to scan all the food that you have in your fridge, and there's an app that you can use to query it. As we move into the future, all the packages that you buy and labels and everything, you'll put it into your fridge and it will automatically know what's in your fridge or not. It will help you restock. But if you're an older patient and you have a dietitian or a nutritionist working with you, you'd be able to use this information to design really interesting diets and really interesting food for your clients. But maybe your clients aren't the best of cooks, or maybe they're just lonely. So maybe instead of just telling them, here's a recipe, you'll have a hologram of you showing them how to prepare a recipe. Now, this is still a concept device, but I do expect that we're going to see things like a hologram chef over the coming years. Another interesting device that's coming on the market next year is from Telspec. It's a food scanner, and what it does is that it uses a range of spectrometry to be able to scan food, and it connects through your smartphone to the cloud. It analyzes what's in the things that you're going to eat. And once you've eaten it, it will help you track calories. It'll give you an opportunity to say, oh, I wasn't feeling so good after eating that, and help you figure out what things are irritants to you. We'll also have 3D food printers. Now, many of you have heard of 3D printing, but you probably don't think about food. This is from a company called Natural Foods, that's Foodini, and they have a device that's initially aimed at the professional chef market. It's launching this year, that does beautiful creations with natural food. So if you were making pasta, you'd prepare your pasta, you'd prepare your flour, you'd prepare the fillings, you'd put them all in these steel canisters, and it would print them out exactly according to different designs that you download from the internet. If you're running a facility for patients, something like this could help you create really beautiful meals for people using all kinds of ingredients, things that you wouldn't normally do because they just take too long, too fussy. 3D printing has lots and lots of medical uses. An example, stem cells, bionic ears, blood vessels, heart tissues, even robotic hands are being 3D printed. There's also 3D organ printing. And with organ printing, there are a couple of sides.
It's the stuff.
So I'll leave that one there. Bioprinting is really interesting, and it's not science fiction. They've already printed liver tissue that has been approved by the FDA for testing liver drugs. But it's not just living tissue. We're going to be able to 3D print medicine, customized medicine. There's already a prototype chemical printer that prints at the molecular level. There's also nanoscale printing. One of the things that RMIT is working on in its nanoscale labs is the ability to print little motorized machines that are so small they could literally address a blood clot from within your system. Things that are inoperable will suddenly be cured. There's 3D printing of DNA. You can just imagine the implications of being able to change your DNA or cure all kinds of diseases. Robotics are going to be absolutely huge. Everything from humanoid-type robots to robots in agriculture to robots in factories. Driverless cars are an area that is going to make a big impact on society. There are lots of different prototypes happening right now. There's Google, there's Apple, there's even GoGet. One of the things that's going to happen, though, is that you're not just going to suddenly wake up and see driverless cars all around. The features are going to be introduced very gradually, initially into top-end models. We already have robot-driven cars that do self-parking. I predict that the first thing we're going to see is an autopilot mode on main highways. And if you think about many elderly people, as they get older, they get less and less sure themselves with driving. They don't like to go fast, and they get afraid of going on highways. Imagine if you had designated highways where you put your car into autopilot mode. Suddenly, your navigation possibilities increase dramatically. By 2050, you're not going to be able to buy a car that is not completely autonomously driven. This is going to have a humongous impact on the economy. Roughly 28% of Australian jobs are in the driving industry, and in another 20 years, those jobs are in danger of completely disappearing. Flying robots are another really important category of robotics, and they take lots of shapes and sizes, everything from big fixed-wing aircraft to tiny rotorcrafters and helicopter things, and even very tiny insect-like, bug-like robots. One particular application that I find fascinating is an ambulance drone. When people have a cardiac arrest, many die because an ambulance is not able to get to them in time. It typically in Europe takes about 10 minutes to get to a patient. This ambulance drone is designed to get to them within a minute or so. It flies at over 100 kilometers an hour, and it carries an onboard flying defibrillator. So someone calls emergency services on their telephone, and the drone homes in on them, and then you have someone from the remote emergency services guiding you through applying a defibrillator. There are also a number of robotic innovations in the healthcare space that may be useful for many of you in this room. One that I particularly like is this robot bed that separates in half and becomes a wheelchair. Another one that's really interesting and is already being used in Japan is a robotic hair washing system. Pet robots are another really fun application. This is Paro, and it's modeled after a harp seal, and it has had great clinical success for people with depression and dementia. It helps to alleviate social isolation. It has lots of sensors. It can tell when you pick it up and hug it. It can tell when you're stroking it. It can tell when you're hitting it. And it remembers your actions and mimics behavior based on what you did the last time. It's a way of giving pet therapy to situations where it's not feasible to bring in a real pet. And then there are robotic exoskeletons, and these are really interesting to help people who may be too frail to walk on their own or even unable to walk on their own. There are lots of different ways that these sensors might work, but one way is to be able to pick up the nerve signals that go through your body, and if a weak biosignal is detected, that's when the robot skeleton will move in. The one that I've pictured here is just for the lower legs, but there are complete robot systems. Mind-controlled medical devices are another really interesting innovation. Again, multiple ways that these work. One is with an EEG, and you see on the left this guy has a skull cap that basically has a whole bunch of diodes. You wouldn't really want to be wearing that around all the time, but it's an early way of being able to move a wheelchair just using your mind. But that can get really tiring after a while to constantly be thinking, I want to move right, I want to move right, I want to move right. So what's happened is that you meld artificial intelligence with this. So you set your intention, I want to move here, and then the AI takes over and continues moving the wheelchair in that particular direction until you change the intention. Something similar also with prosthetic limbs. A man who had a double amputation because because of an electrical accident, has been fitted with these prosthetic limbs that literally take signals from his nerves and allow him about a 30-degree range of motion. Then there are robot surrogates. This is from 2012, but it's still pretty out there. Two researchers, one in Israel, one in France, were working with this system. Functional MRI is being used to control a remote robot, a surrogate. So the researcher in Israel thinks, I want to walk here, I want to do this, I want to lift my arm, and the robot, thousands of miles away, literally moves. This could give a new lease on life to people who are paralyzed. It might also lead to a bit of a science fiction scenario, much like the movie Surrogates starring Bruce Willis, where people decide to have beautiful robots live their lives for them, but meantime they're just sitting on their couch or in their bed thinking what the robot will do. Let's hope that that dystopian scenario doesn't happen. And then we have Pepper. Pepper is an emotionally intelligent robot that was launched in Japan just a couple of months ago. 1,000 units went on sale and they sold out in 1 minute. People are absolutely enthralled with Pepper. It's a huge hit. But what's the next thing that's going to happen? Well, you take the ability to print skin, you take AI, you take advanced robotics. The next generation is going to be flesh bots. I'm talking about robots covered with real flesh that, for all intents and purposes, may look and act like humans. These pictures are taken from a science fiction show called Extant, where this young boy is actually a humanic. It's an artificial life form that was adopted by a family, and literally they grew to love each other. The plot's much more complicated than that, but you can imagine how robots like this, flesh bots, could be integrated into an elder care system where one of the biggest issues that we have is social isolation and that lack of just not feeling love and attention from someone. So what's the next logical consequence? Well, you got to talk about sex. When you think about science fiction and robots, sex ends up being part of the story. The first really main place that I saw this was in Isaac Asimov's novels, where in The Robots of Dawn, a woman fell in love with a life form that was a robot, but that looked human. So much so that she considered this machine to be her husband. Then we have Blade Runner, another iconic science fiction film where there were a whole range of humanic type of robots, including those that were manufactured just for pleasure bots. And then, of course, there's Battlestar Galactica, the reimagined setting where Cylon's robots evolved and designed their own next generation of flesh-covered robots. But they weren't just flesh-covered. They actually looked inside like humans as well. So you'd cut them open and they wouldn't be metal, they'd be human. All kinds of romantic relationships ensued, including one between a human male and a Cylon robot that resulted in a hybrid child. Now, when we think about elder care, a lot of people don't want to talk about sex, but let's face it, just because we're getting older, it doesn't mean that we don't want that kind of affection to be part of our lives. And even if it's not the physical act, the idea of being able to get that kind of love and comfort from someone is an important part of well-being. What if you could have a robot that was designed to look exactly like someone that you loved? What if it catered to your every desire? You can imagine how life might be very different. We're probably looking at the year 2050 or beyond with this kind of technology, but it is most certainly on the horizon. And the last thing that I'll leave you with in my talk this afternoon is a vision of the future, probably beyond 2050, that was a scenario written by Thomas Frey, a futurist in America that I follow. And it's taking on the generation of technology, probably 10 generations out from where we're at today, looking at flying robots and swarm bots, robots that act collectively like a hive, and nanotechnology. Imagine a world where you have your own personal swarm of robots, a cloud that surrounds you and transforms its shape and function depending on what you're doing. So for example, you get in the shower in the morning, and instead of reaching for your towel to dry off, your swarm surrounds you and dries you. The next thing you know, it dries your hair, styles your hair. If you're a woman, it puts on your makeup. If you're a man, it shaves you. It then transforms into appropriate clothing. If you're going to work, it might be a business suit, but then later in the day, it might transform into a black tie suit or a cocktail dress. It can keep you warm. It can serve as body armor. And someday, maybe it will even be your personal short-term transport system and help you to fly like Superman. So I'll leave you with that thought of the future. There's so much more I could say, but time does not allow it. Thank you for having me at the LASA conference.
Thank you, Shara.
Thank you, Fred.